first step in the process of making our lemon meringue tarts is to make our pâte sucrée. We're going to actually make like a shortbread sugar crust. And these are the ingredients here, and we're going to use the creaming method to accomplish this task. So the first step is to make sure that our butter is nice and soft, again, like a really nice ripe avocado. So go ahead and leave it out of room or use the microwave to soften it about 10 seconds at a time until it's softened. We're going to place this in the mixer along with the rest of our ingredients. So the first step in making our pâte sucrée, our sweet tart dough, is to cream our butter and our sugars. So I'm going to put my softened butter into my mixer fitted with a paddle, and then I'm going to add my sugar. My sugar consists of granulated sugar as well as powdered sugar, and we're using the powdered sugar to help tighten up the dough a little bit so it really retains its shape when we bake, because the powdered sugar contains a little bit of cornstarch, so it'll absorb the moisture. So we're going to place this on about second speed and let this go until it's nice, smooth, and creamy. We'll come back to this when it's the right consistency. After about a minute of mixing, I'm going to turn it off and scrape down the sides. Because I'm dealing with a small amount of dough in this mixer, I want to make sure that my butter is not stuck on the paddle and that it gets distributed nice and evenly. So I'm going to scrape it down, continue mixing, and at this time add my salt. Go ahead and turn it on, and we'll mix this for about another 30 seconds to a minute. Once your dough is completely mixed together, there's no mixed in pieces of butter, you see it all nice and smooth and homogeneous, we are going to scrape it down, and then we will be adding the yolks and the vanilla. Add the yolks one at a time so that it really has a chance to emulsify into the mixture, and then we will add our flour. So I'm going to add one yolk this time. Turn it on. Once that looks like it's pretty much come together, you can go ahead and add the other yolk. Make sure you scrape all of that out of there. You can see we're using yolk and not whole egg in this recipe, and that is because we are really only looking for the fat and its flavor and its tenderness versus adding any more of the water from the egg white that will help bind with the flour and create our gluten, which will make it tough. So we want this to be a nice tender crust. So now we're going to add our vanilla. And then we're going to scrape this again before we add the flour. Okay, so now I want to stop the machine and give it a good scrape so it can be evenly distributed. Feel free to lower the bowl if it makes it easier for you to get in there. Use the sides of your rubber spatula, the top of it, any way that you can get in to get all of that stuff off of the paddle and back into the mix. Use the paddle to scrape off your spatula and make sure this is nice and smooth, and then we're ready to add our flour. So my mixture is smooth. I don't see any pieces of butter in there. It's all one color. It looks great. I'm gonna scrape it off of my paddle and go ahead and add my first addition of flour. I'm going to add my flour in 3 stages and only on speed 1. We want to mix this in each stage just until the flour looks incorporated, and then add another third of the flour. Just until that dry gets mixed in there. First speed only, another third of the flour. After this next addition, we will stop and scrape it, and then add the remaining flour. All right, so I want to go ahead and scrape down the sides. Again, lower the bowl if it's easier. Go ahead and get any of the dry flour mixture that's sitting on top or on the paddle down into the bowl. We really want to make sure we do not overmix this so we don't develop that gluten and get a tough crust. We want it to be nice and tender. All right, we're going to add in the last bit of flour. Mix it on first speed. Just until incorporated. If you find there's any little bit of unpicked up flour on the bottom, you can do that by hand. So we'll take this, lower down the bowl, release the paddle, and take this to our work surface. Now we want to remove the dough from the paddle and pretty much mix the rest by hand just to make sure it's fully incorporated. So you can use your spatula to do this, or you can just get in there and use your fingers. Really get all of that dough off of there. We really want to make sure this is incorporated completely in order for our dough to come out really well on the end. So my favorite tool to do this with is just a bowl scraper. So I will transfer to using the bowl scraper here, and it really allows me to get all the edges, every little bit of dough that's in the bowl. And at the same time, I can kind of help it along by smushing any of those unincorporated pieces into the dough so it looks completely mixed in well. I'm going to place this dough onto a piece of parchment paper and smush it down. You can see that it's very soft, very kind of sticky at this point, and it's not ready to be used. This needs to chill for at least 2 hours or overnight for that matter. You want to flatten it out into a disc that looks like this, cover it with the parchment paper, and then place it onto your sheet pan in the refrigerator. So this is what it should look like when the dough is ready. And then we'll come back to this after about 2 hours so that we can roll it out. Now that our dough has rested for about 2 hours, it's nice and firm, and I can easily pull this back and remove it from the parchment paper. So you can place this into whatever size tart pan you have. If you have small ones, you might want to cut this up in smaller pieces. You want some dusting flour for your surface, a rolling pin, and whatever size tart pan you have. I'm going to do 2 different ones just to show you the options. I have a rectangle and a round. Typically the round is around 9 inches, but again, if you have bigger, that's fine. If you have smaller, that's fine as well. So I'm going to show you the technique on how to roll out the dough and line it into your pan. The first thing that you want to do is put some dusting flour onto your surface, and you want to do it from a little bit higher up and move it around a little bit. You don't want a tremendous amount of flour to dry out your dough, but you do not want your dough to stick. Now, if this is really, really firm, you can kind of bang it on the counter to soften it slightly on the edges. Try and maintain a round. If you're going to place it into your round tart pan, it'll be a little bit easier to roll out. And then we want to dust the top, again, just a little bit, enough so that it doesn't stick to our rolling pin. So what I want to do is I want to roll from top to bottom. Now, the very beginning, it's going to be a little firm. So if you want, you can pound it out like this and then constantly move it around the surface so that you make sure that you have enough flour underneath so that it does not stick to whatever surface you're rolling on. Soften the dough a little bit more evenly, and then you can get ready to roll it out. Now, some people like to roll in between parchment paper, and you can do that as well, but I feel like I have a little more control over doing it on my board. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And again, adding just a touch of flour as needed, making sure I move it around on my cutting board constantly, and rolling the rolling pin all the way from edge to edge, turning the dough and softening it as I go. This will take a little bit of pressure and muscle from you, so don't give up so easily, and really make sure that you work quickly so that your dough stays cold but pliable at the same time. So if it starts to crack like this, just push it back together and make sure, again, you're dusting the surface just a little and also dusting the board just enough so that it doesn't stick. The slower you go, the softer your dough will get, the warmer it is, and the harder it is to work with. We're looking for about 1/8 of an inch thick, so constantly turn your dough and move it out so it maintains a slightly round shape. Once you get to the thickness that you want to put your hands underneath and really feel that it's the same thickness throughout, not just on the outside edge, but really a little bit deeper into the dough. And we want to make sure it also fits the size of my pan. So I'm going to place my tart pan here, and I need to take into consideration not just the base size here, but also the height. And so I need a little bit extra around to maintain that height. Now, you can go ahead and work with it just like this, but I'm going to trim it a little so that it's a little bit easier to work with, allowing plenty extra around the edge for forming in my tart pan. And this will just clean it up and not be so heavy when I'm working with it. This you can reserve for later on. So what I want to do now is make sure that my rolling pin is up on the top. I'm going to very quickly, with all 8 fingers here, roll it on to the top of the rolling pin and gently roll back. I do not want to adhere the dough to itself, so I'm lifting the handles here. And then what I want to do is gently look over my tart pan and very carefully lower it into the pan without putting pressure from the rolling pin on the sharp edges, because what we do not want to do is cut my edges too soon. I'm going to lift up my hands here and place the dough on the inside by taking my finger and pushing it into the crevice, lifting the dough and pushing with my finger. Go ahead and very gently turn the pan while you do this around in a circle. Again, trying to avoid cutting the dough with the edge. Now, I'll show you how to fix those little holes that I've made there. Okay, so now we've gone over the edge. So what I want to do is, if I have little gaps, because it pulled on the dough a little bit, I can lower that dough in and just push it together to paste it with my fingers. All right, so once that's done, then we're going to cut the edge. And I'm going to leave this, again, a little bit loose here, and then roll my rolling pin right on top. Remove our excess. You can save this for another use. And just push this just to the edge, into the grooves of the tart pan. The grooves in the tart pan will help hold that dough into place while it's baking. So now this is ready, and it needs to go in the refrigerator for a good 30 minutes to an hour to chill before we're ready to bake it. The next step of doing our tart, we want to bake our tart shell. And because we don't want this to puff up in the oven, we want to do something called blind baking. Now this shell we're going to bake about halfway to 3/4 of the way through, because we're going to be placing our lemon tart filling on the inside. And because that's liquid and needs to be baked again, we want this to be set but not completely baked through. What I want to do is cover this with a piece of parchment paper and tuck it up into the crevices here. You can go ahead and cut this if it's bothering you, but it doesn't bother me at all. And then I want to weigh it down, and I'm going to use just some beans. I have some beans that I use for baking. I label them and make sure they do not get cooked to eat, and I keep that in my pantry so that I always have a weight to weigh my tart or pie shells down. What I want to do is place this onto a sheet pan, place it into the oven, and I'm going to bake this for about 20 to 25 minutes until the crust is starting to set and get a light golden brown. And then I'm going to remove the paper and then we'll get ready for our filling. A couple notes that are important is that your beans are pretty much single layer in here. I'm using the larger beans. They will weigh it down a little bit more. You do not want to pile them up because it will actually prevent the crust from starting to set and brown. So we want to make sure single layer. The next thing is we always want to make sure that we are baking right from the refrigerator, that if you do this ahead of time, place it back in the refrigerator until your oven is ready, and then I'm going to put it in cold into the oven. When the tart comes out of the oven, you want to remove the parchment paper along with the beans very carefully. Set them aside and you'll reuse those over and over again. And you can see here that the tart is set, but it's still very raw. So I want to go ahead and bake this a little bit more to get this nice light and brown color. For the lemon filling, to get the most out of your lemons, when you're juicing them, you want to go ahead and kind of like massage them on the table, and you'll feel them start to soften up on the inside a lot. And this will allow you to get a lot more juice than you might imagine. Some people like to put them in a microwave. You don't want to cook them, but you just want to soften them. I like to use this tool. It's a lemon juicer. You want to place your lemon upside down and then go ahead and juice it. We're going to measure 2 ounces of juice for this recipe, so squeeze as much as you can. Perfect. That's almost pretty much half. So maybe 1 lemon will do it. Every lemon is going to have a different amount of juice, so try not to go by lemons and actually go by the quantity of the juice, and therefore it will be consistent every time. So I'm a little short, need a little bit more lemon, and then we're going to go ahead and put it all together. This filling I really love. It's like a lemon bar consistency. You can definitely use a custard in this recipe as well, but this one holds up really nicely when you slice individual pieces. And so all you want to do is place your ingredients together all in a bowl, everything except the flour at first. So we want to add our eggs, our sugar, mix that together really well, and then we're going to incorporate our lemon juice. Until it's very smooth. And you can make this filling ahead of time if you like and just keep it refrigerated until you're ready to use it. And then we're going to add in our flour. A little bit at a time, really incorporating that. This will help stiffen up that mixture later on after it's baked. We don't want any lumps in there. Really make sure you whisk this together very well until it's all incorporated. That's all there is to the filling. So we're going to set this aside, and when our tart dough is ready, we'll go ahead and fill that and bake it in the oven. Once your tart is done in the oven, you want to take your filling and make sure you stir it up so it is completely all incorporated evenly together. And then I'm going to pour that directly into my tart. Remember, this is going to have the meringue on top, so we don't want this to be too full and too thick. This one I had made for the other one as well, so yours should be able to fit the whole batch right inside of one tart pan. So I'm gonna bake this off until it's just set. You want to see if it jiggles or not. Once it sets, it's completely done. We're gonna take it out and let it cool all the way before we add our meringue. In my oven, it's been about 25 minutes, and what I'm looking for is when I jiggle the pan, nothing jiggles. So my filling is set, and that's what I'm looking for. So I'm gonna remove these from the oven and let them completely cool, and then we'll make our meringue. Preparing for our meringue requires that you put the water in the bottom of the pot first. Make sure your pot is nice and clean, free of any debris, any pretty much anything in there. Then what I want to do is add my corn syrup. Make sure you scrape that out with a spatula so you get everything that you've measured. And then I will add my sugar. We're going to create a simple syrup with this, with the addition of the corn syrup. We're going to bring it to a specific temperature in order for our sugar to be able to set in our meringue and make it nice and stiff. So I want to now go ahead and very, very gently mix in my sugar so that there is no undissolved sugar sitting on the bottom of the pan. I want to turn this on low and work on dissolving the sugar before it comes to a boil. Feel free to go ahead and move your pot around slightly to swirl the mixture in order for it, again, to completely dissolve. So we'll let that come so it's clear, and then we will bring it to a boil and add our thermometer at that point. When your sugar is almost completely dissolved, see I'm just stirring that up and it's getting very clear in there. I like to take extra precautionary measure by taking a clean pastry brush with some water and brushing down the sides. Because we're making an Italian meringue, we're cooking the sugar and we're adding it to our egg whites. I want to really make sure that I don't have any undissolved sugar crystals later on, which will give our final meringue a grittiness, which is very undesirable. So I want to make sure that I clean the sides, not putting excessive amounts of water, just that will prolong the process. But right now it's starting to come to a boil. It is clear, the sugar has some impurities in it, that's why it looks a little white, but that will go away in just a minute. And you can see now that we have clear bubbles forming. I'm going to give it one more brush just to make sure. Again, starting at the top and letting that drip down. And we should be good. So now is the point when I can insert my thermometer. I'm using a candy thermometer for this. And you could use a digital thermometer as well, but this one has my clip and it goes right inside and it fits right into my pot. So I want to bring this to the temperature and then get my mixer ready with my egg whites. So once my mixture gets to 236 degrees, that's when I will start whipping my egg whites. I'm going to go ahead and place them into my mixing bowl just to get them ready. Make sure your bowl and your whip are extremely clean because that's where we'll have problems with whipping if they're not. And I will keep my eye on the temperature when the time is ready. All right, my sugar syrup is just about 236, so we're going to go ahead and turn on the mixer. And when you turn the mixer on, you want it fairly high because I have such a small amount in there. So I really needed to grab the meringue, grab the egg whites at this point. So depending on what size mixer you have, that will determine the speed. So what I'm trying to do is get a white foam. I do not want to see any liquid when my sugar is ready to go in. We are going to start adding it when my sugar gets to 240 degrees. So my sugar's at 240 and I'm going to move it closer to my mixer. And you can see here that we have a white foam. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit so you can really see that you can't see any of the liquid underneath. And that's exactly where I want to start adding my sugar syrup. When I add this syrup, it needs to drizzle into the side of the mixing bowl. I'm going to take it. I'm going to make sure that my speed is on slow or 1. And I'm going to drizzle this literally in between the bowl and the whip. The goal is to not have it splatter on the sides of the pot. Make this a very slow process. Take your time. And I'm leaning it against the side of my mixing bowl so that my arm does not get tired. And I'm just tilting it so that it goes in there a little bit slowly and steady. Once all of your syrup is added, you can lift your pot up and over your mixer, because what you do not want to do is scrape the bottom of your pot. Okay, all of that mixture is in there and I'm going to increase the speed and whip this until the mixture is completely cool, and I'll show you what it looks like along the way. So meringue is getting very thick. I'm going to turn it down so you can see it a little bit better. It's very dense, very thick, glossy. It's beautiful, but it's still very warm on the bottom. So we really want this to go longer so that it is extremely stable once it cools. And so I want to actually turn that back up and whip it until it's cool. Once your Italian meringue is done, you want to remove it from the mixer and use it right away. So make sure that your tart is cool and you have your pastry bag ready to go. I'm going to remove the whip, and you can see how thick and beautiful this is. That's exactly what you want out of the Italian meringue. Now the benefit of using this is that it's extremely shelf stable, and this entire dessert can actually be kept at room temperature overnight. You do not have to refrigerate this dessert. So that's a bonus for sure when you're making a certain dessert. So I'm gonna go ahead and fill my pastry bag with some of the meringue, and I want to use, on this particular one, I'm going to use a like a rose tip. You can do a round tip, you can do a star tip. It's really whatever you prefer, but I really like this look. And so we're going to go ahead and fill the bag. Make sure you don't have any meringue over the edges. And you can always use your bowl scraper to push it forward so that it keeps your bag nice and clean. It also pushes all the product up towards the edge so that you can easily grab the bag and twist it with no problems whatsoever. So this one, before we start, we want to remove our tart from our tart pan. You do that by pushing with your fingers up underneath, grabbing the bottom, and very gently removing it onto here. Now, this one is about to come off the bottom tray, and you can either leave it on there to go ahead and decorate it, or take it off right now and put it on something else. But I don't have a platter right now to put it on, so we're gonna just leave it right on here for decorating. And so what I wanna do is have my tip where the thin part is up top and the wider part is on the bottom. And then I'm just gonna do a design in which I go back and forth. And it's almost like a big ribbon. Now, if you have a bigger, taller tip like this, feel free to use it, but this is the largest one that I have. And if you feel like you need to grab more of the meringue in the bag, go ahead and stop, twist the bag, put the pressure on it, and then continue on with your ribbon. Try and get it so that you don't have any air pockets. You can go back and forth as many times as you like, twisting the bag to put the pressure forward. And again, this is just one variation of the designs that you can do. So I think that looks like a real modern, sophisticated dessert. And we're going to torch and decorate it next. You can definitely eat this meringue just the way it is, but I love it torched. So I happen to have it torched. If you have one of these, this style, or just a camping torch, that'll work fine as well. So I want to put my top on it, turn it on very low, adjust it so the heat is low, and just give it a nice browning. And this has the flavor profile of like a toasted marshmallow. Make sure you move the flame around a lot so you don't burn one area. The next step of decoration is to use our candied lemon slices that we made, and you can just place those in randomly, any direction that you like. You can also use some fresh blueberries on here. You can use some mint, anything you like to decorate your meringue tart. Once again, decorating the round tart can be very similar to the rectangular tart, but I'm just going to do a different design with a different tip. So I'm going to remove the tart again from the outside and leave it on the base just simply because I feel like it's easier to cut and serve from there. And then I'm going to take a round tip and just do different elevations of my meringue. Some taller, some smaller, and just go around in a circle and start to make different sizes. I'm going to cover the entire base though, so that I can go ahead and torch this. So it'll have that toasted look to it. To cut your tart, make sure you have a knife that is long enough to reach across, and then wet it just a little bit so that it will not stick to the meringue. So what I'm going to do is cut through just the center, and then make sure you pull it down out the bottom so that you have a nice straight cut. Clean your knife off and then wet it again and decide how big you would like your piece to be, and again follow the same direction. So for our blueberry compote, all I'm going to do is place some blueberries into a sauce pot with a little bit of sugar and a squeeze of lemon. And all I want to do is kind of cook this down until the blueberries just start to pop. I like to leave my sauce a little chunky in this case because I like the texture. If you prefer that you want it smooth, then you can go ahead and puree it. Place it in a sauce bottle, place it in a bowl. There really are no rules with this. Just wanted something that will add a little bit of a kind of a liquid dimension to the dish, so something that's very sauce-like that will go really nicely along with the lemon flavored dessert. So you can see how it's releasing all the juices. These were frozen blueberries, so the cellular structure is already broken in it. And then we have the sweetness from the sugar and a little bit of tartness from the lemon. So I'm just going to cook this for about 1 more minute, and then we're ready to use on our dessert. So now it's time for plate up. So we want to gather all of our components that we've made in order to garnish this plated dessert. So what I've done was we've cut the one piece out of here, and I'm going to just gently lift it off and place it onto my plate. And then I want to take some of my blueberry sauce that we did, and I can just kind of gather that on one section here and just let it flow. You can be all over the place, you can be composed, however you want to do this. You can take a few pieces of the fennel pollen streusel that we had previously made, and that'll add a nice extra crunch, and that beautiful flavor of the fennel pollen is really beautiful contrast with the lemon in here. And then we have also our blueberry fruit leather that we made that I'm going to do in like a fan. And I don't want to cover up the design on the top here, but I do want it to stick into the dessert. And I'm offsetting it with the blueberry over here, so it's not on the same side. And then I have my candied lemon slice. So I'm going to place that in there. And then just because I think it needs like a little pop of color, I have some mint in the garden that instead of putting a mint leaf, it's meant to be eaten with the dessert because blueberry, mint, and lemon are a perfect combination. So I'm actually going to just gently sprinkle this onto here so that the intention is to eat it along with the dessert. So we have all of our components to a beautifully plated dessert. We have our lemon meringue tart, our blueberry compote, our fennel pollen streusel, our candied lemon, and our blueberry fruit leather.